Would you like walk into a room and immediately know that your mother was upset, even when she said she was fine, everything was fine, but you heard something in her voice that nobody else seemed to notice? Maybe you knew when to stay quiet, when not to ask for something, when to make her laugh, when to comfort her, when simply disappear to your room because she had a difficult day. And perhaps people around you described you as an unusually sensitive, mature, for your age, emotionally intelligent child. So today I want to offer you a different way of looking at that. What if part of what you call empathy didn't begin as a gift? What if some of it began as a job? The one you were never consciously given but understood anyway. Like you had to pay attention, know what she felt, not overwhelm her, help her feel better, and not make things worse. So if this happened with you again and again, you may have become what I call an emotional container. Someone who learned to receive emotions that weren't theirs, to hold them, to organize themselves around them, and sometimes even to regulate them for another person. And children who become very good at this often grow into adults who keep doing it with partners, friends, colleagues. So yeah. So today I want to walk you through 7 signs that you may have been your mother's emotional container and what that can look like years later. One thing before we start, of course, I'm not blaming any mothers, no, because parents, I'm a parent, we carry our own histories, our own limitations, our own unprocessed emotions, all that, tons of pressure, stuff, cultural expectations, and we sometimes don't get support, right? So understanding how something developed is not the same as assigning blame. The question we're asking today is simply, what emotional role did you learn to occupy and how it affects your life and what you can do with it, right? So, sign number 1, you learned to read her before you learned to read yourself. Now think back to your childhood. Your mother walks through the door, she hasn't said a word. Could you already tell what kind of evening it was going to be, like from the way she walked, her footsteps, the way she set down her bag, the tension in her face, the speed of her movements? One small change in tone and you knew something is wrong. Well, of course, children are naturally attentive to their caregivers, and that is ordinary, normal. There's a difference between ordinary attunement and chronic emotional monitoring. When a caregiver's emotional state affects child's sense of security, and child has every reason to become an exceptionally careful observer. You don't consciously decide to develop hyper attunement. You simply learn that her mood matters and I need to know what it is before anything else happens. And this can become sophisticated. Years later, you walk into a meeting and you immediately sense who is irritated with whom. You notice your partner answered okay slightly differently than usual, and text arrives with a period instead of an exclamation mark, and your whole nervous system registers something has changed. Well, people tell you that you are very perceptive, and you probably are. But here's the question: is your perception a resource or is it surveillance? Can you notice someone's emotional state without immediately organizing your own emotional state around their emotional state? That's the real difference. So, sign number 2, you were the easy child. This one is deceptive and interesting at the same time. So, if you were mature for your age, independent, responsible, very understanding, and adults described you as someone who never gave any trouble, could take care of themselves, who was, sometimes people say, an old soul. Sometimes that's simply temperament, but sometimes that easy child learns something very early. There isn't enough emotional room here for both of us. If mom is overwhelmed, I can't be. If mom is sad, I shouldn't add my own sadness on top of hers. If mom is anxious, I should be the calm one. If she needs me, my own needs can wait their turn. Donald Winnicott's work is useful here. He wrote about the development of what he called the false self, an adaptation built around compliance with the environment rather than the free expression of a spontaneous, authentic one. The question it leaves us with is how much of your goodness was actually adaptation? Maybe you weren't easy because you didn't have needs. Maybe you became easy because expressing your needs felt too much, too costly. And this is where people often misunderstand emotional neglect, because it doesn't always look like child sitting alone with no one cares. Sometimes the child is loved, fed, educated, and still learns that her more complicated emotions are too much for the system around them. So the child becomes extraordinarily manageable, and then one day she's a 40-year-old woman who's still extraordinarily manageable and exhausted, while everyone around her seems perfectly comfortable and she can't quite work out why. Sign number 3 is your mother's distress became your responsibility. This is where we move from sensitivity into something closer to emotional role reversal. Did you comfort your mother? Did she tell you about problems that were developmentally far too complicated for a child to carry, like her marriage, money, loneliness, disappointments, conflicts with other people? She may never have said directly, "Take care of me, baby." She may not have intended to burden you at all, but children don't need an explicit job description. They infer their role from the relationship, and your role may have quietly become make mom feel okay. So you cheered her up, you reassured her, you behaved especially well when she was struggling, you tried never to disappoint her. Perhaps you became her confidant. There's a real body of research and clinical literature on parentification, including emotional parentification, where a child takes on functions that would ordinarily belong to an adult. And here, too, the picture is nuanced. Helping your mother occasionally is not pathological at all. Children contribute to families, comfort parents. The question isn't whether it happened once. The question is whether it became your role. Did you learn that your own sense of security depended on her emotional stability? Because if you did, you may still be living by that rule now. When someone you love is distressed, it's your job to fix it. Now, sign 4. Other people's negative emotions still feel like an emergency for you. Think about your adult life. Your partner is disappointed in you. What happens inside you in that moment? Can you think simply, okay, so he or she is disappointed, I understand why, we'll talk about it later? Or does your whole nervous system switch on? Like you start explaining, apologizing, reassuring, fixing. Maybe you abandon a boundary you actually meant to hold, and someone becomes distant, and suddenly you're reviewing the last 2 days in every detail. What did I say? What did I do? Was my tone wrong? Like, should I text? Should I not? You name it. So I want to draw a distinction between empathy and emotional over-responsibility. Empathy says, I can understand what you're feeling. And over-responsibility says, because you're feeling it, I have to do something about it. And emotional absorption goes further. You're feeling it, and now somehow I'm feeling it too, and I'm losing track of where you end and I begin. These are not the same process, even though they often get folded together. This distinction has become interesting to me professionally because we talk constantly about teaching people empathy, but we talk far less about what happens when interpersonal sensitivity becomes so strong that another person's emotional state starts to dominate your own. Being able to feel with someone is very, very valuable. And being unable to stay regulated unless the other person is regulated is something different. Sign 5. You are better at identifying everyone else's feelings than your own. I see this pattern often in emotionally perceptive people. Ask yourself, what do you think your partner is feeling? And the answer comes instantly. He's anxious because his boss criticized him, and underneath the anger, he's actually ashamed. Ask about her mother, and again, immediately, she feels abandoned because my sister isn't calling enough. Ask about a colleague, she feels threatened, right? Then I ask, what are you feeling? And there's silence. Or a thought arrives instead of a feeling. I feel like you shouldn't have done that. That's not a feeling, I say. Try again. And this sophisticated, emotionally literate person suddenly can't locate herself and understand what she's feeling. Alice Miller wrote about highly sensitive children becoming remarkably skilled at perceiving and responding to their caregivers' needs. I still find that idea compelling because it captures a real paradox. You can become extraordinarily fluent in the emotional world while becoming at the same time disconnected from your own place in it. Your attention travels outward automatically. who needs what, who's uncomfortable, who is angry, who feels left out, who needs reassurance. And so one of the simplest questions of all can become surprisingly hard to answer. Not what would make everyone comfortable, not what's reasonable, not what would disappoint no one, but simply what do I want? What do I feel? For an emotional container, that can feel like a radical question. Now, sign 6, you confuse being needed with being loved. This one shapes adult relationships, and if your early emotional value came from your ability to understand, soothe, accommodate, stabilize another person, then being needed can start to feel almost identical to intimacy. You may find yourself drawn to people who are complicated, emotionally unavailable, dysregulated, in some kind of crisis, difficult to understand, and you may feel extraordinary closeness when they finally open up to you, because this is familiar ground. You know exactly how to earn intimacy here. You listen, you understand, you analyze, you hold, you want, you wait, you make room. And because holding another person's inner world is a very intimate act, it can feel like mutual intimacy. But sometimes it is not. Sometimes one person is revealing themselves and the other is simply containing. And that is not automatically reciprocity. So it's worth asking yourself, if this person didn't need my emotional labor, would there still be a relationship here? And a harder question is, when I need the same degree of care, what actually will happen? Will they do that for me? That's where you find out whether you are in a mutual intimacy or simply performing a very familiar childhood role for your adult partner. Now, sign 7, you can only relax when everyone else is okay. This may be the deepest sign of all. Imagine someone you love is upset and there's genuinely nothing left for you to do. They're allowed to be upset. They're disappointed by a decision you made, and you've listened, you've been respectful, and you're not changing your decision. Can you go make dinner? Can you read? Can you sleep? Can you feel any pleasure while someone you love is still unhappy? For people who grew up as emotional containers, this can feel almost immoral. Immoral. Listen to that. How can I possibly be okay when you're not? And that sentence tells us a great deal, because psychological differentiation is the capacity to hold two emotional realities at once. You can be sad and I can be okay. You can be anxious and I can stay calm. You can be disappointed in me and I can still believe that I made the right decision. You can misunderstand me and I don't have to spend the next 6 hours correcting that. You can have an emotion without that emotion becoming an instruction for me. That is not coldness, that is differentiation. Paradoxically, I think that's what makes empathy sustainable, because now you can actually be with them without drowning alongside them. I want to correct something that circulates a great deal on social media. You'll see quotations attributed to famous psychoanalysts claiming that empathy itself is born out of trauma. I'd be cautious with that. First, many of these quotations online are paraphrased or simply misattributed. Second, empathy is not inherently a trauma response. Human beings have a natural capacity for empathy, attachment, social perception, and trauma doesn't invent all of that. What a difficult developmental environment can do is shape how that interpersonal sensitivity gets used. That's the distinction that I am actually interested in. Perhaps you're naturally sensitive to begin with, and then your environment taught that sensitivity in rule, like pay closer attention. And so sensitivity becomes vigilance, and empathy turns into being overly responsible for other people's emotions. And the way you care is like compulsive caregiving. So there's much more than simply saying that empathetic people are traumatized people. I don't think it's a useful generalization. I want to also reintroduce a term that I keep returning to in my thinking: emotional absorption. I use it to describe the experience in which another person's emotion doesn't simply register as information about them, but begins to become my own emotional experience. Someone walks into the room anxious, and 10 minutes later, I'm anxious. Someone is angry with me, and suddenly I can't locate my own position at all, because their anger has become the most important psychological fact in the room. Someone I love is depressed, and it isn't only that I feel compassion for their depression. My own system starts organizing itself around their depression. So we already have established concepts that overlap with parts of this territory: emotional contagion, empathy, hypervigilance, parentification, differentiation. I'm not suggesting psychology has never touched any of this. What interests me in particular is the pattern itself and the subjective boundary underneath it. At what point does feeling another person's emotions stop helping us understand them and start interfering with our ability to remain ourselves? That's a question I want to keep exploring here on my channel and also in my research. Now I want to talk about ways to stop being an emotional container. So first of all, I'm not asking anyone to become selfish, not at all. And actually, if you are an emotional container, you probably will never be able to become selfish and unempathetic, not possible for you. So the goal is to build a boundary inside the emotional experience. When someone important to you becomes emotional, try asking yourself 4 questions in sequence. First, what is this person actually feeling? Then, what are you feeling? These 2 answers don't have to match. Third, what am I genuinely responsible for here? Perhaps an apology is owed, perhaps you need to listen, perhaps you made a mistake that needs repairing. Emotional boundaries are not an excuse to avoid accountability, of course. But then fourth, what belongs to them? Their history may belong to them. Their interpretation may belong to them. Also their anxiety, disappointment, their decision about what to do with all of that, that all belongs to them. And then practice the sentence, I can care about what you feel without taking over responsibility for what you feel. This is a completely different relationship with empathy. If you recognize yourself in some of the 7 signs, I did, I don't want your conclusion to be that your empathy isn't real. It is very real. Your sensitivity is one of your greatest capacities. The question is whether that capacity has freedom in it. Can you turn your attention toward another person and then bring it back to yourself? Can you understand someone's emotion without automatically obeying it? Can someone you love be uncomfortable while you remain calm? Or can you say no and survive their disappointment? Healing here isn't learning to care less. It may be learning to care without disappearing. To be able to say, I see your sadness, I understand your anger, and I understand your anxiety. I love you, I'm still here, but not inside your emotion. I'm not responsible for eliminating it, and I'm not abandoning myself to regulate you. I am here beside you, but I am separate from you and connected to you. Of course, the goal is not to stop being sensitive. The goal is learning to be deeply sensitive without becoming everyone else's emotional container. So if that resonated with you and if you tried some of the things that I shared, please comment and share other activities, exercises, questions that you practiced, and let's help each other. Okay, take care.